Should be good to go. Oh, all right. So thank you so much for having me here. My name is Johannes Suikkanen. I lead a company that's quite unusual. So we're for about 30 human scientists and business strategists based in New York City and Helsinki here in Finland. What we do in practice is that we work on some of the hardest challenges companies today face around the globe. We call them existential business questions. A lot of times they're framed first as technology questions, but we tend to approach them from a human perspective. And I'm basically making a claim here today that human sciences will emerge as a core competence alongside with technology competence as we enter the era of disruptive technologies. So basically, our daily job, we work with some financial institutions in the US, work with automobile, or I don't know even how you want to call automotive mobility industry, trying to figure out what's the winning value prop for the era of self-driving cars, for example. We also work with some of the largest retailers in the world, with data scientist teams that have recently discovered that in addition to data science, you actually need human sciences to develop a strong contextual understanding in order to understand what's actually going on in the world. And this is, of course, a direct reference to what Risto said earlier. I mean, we already know that it is not enough to rely on algorithms. If you don't understand the context of a doctor facing patients with pneumonia, if you don't actually know how to move forward from that initial situation. But let's move forward and talk a little bit about tech and fintech. So this is quite interesting. I don't know if any of you have seen 2001: Space Odyssey. It's a wonderful science fiction film from the 1960s where there's a computer that becomes sentient, HAL 9000. And there HAL is having a sentient computer having a conversation with Dave, a terrified astronaut. And it's interesting when we talk of tech, even like the very first video we saw today, it's the images like this that actually have come to dominate our future visions. Basically technology that eventually will evolve into a general AI. And it's always, always, always this vision that we have very much informed by science fiction. Well, I think this is emerging almost as a problem because we need to make sure that these technologies that we have now actually become something of massive value. And they can be that if we relate to them in the right way. Because if we have, basically we're always faced, even in fintech, with two paths forward. Either we have technology-first approach, meaning that our visions of future are very much shaped by this idea of general artificial intelligence. And at the end of that path lies the absolute robot apocalypse. Well, it doesn't need to be that way, but this is actually the typical approach to technology when technology is not mature. Because when technology matures, we slowly start to see that actually what matters is its application. And what starts to matter is how does it relate to our lives as human beings. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what does human-first approach mean in tech, because we also have a bit of a problem in fintech, because we have a little bit of a problem in Finland where human beings in technology development have been reduced to users, and we're very, very good with user experience. But that's not actually enough if we want to create disruptive solutions and disruptive businesses. So human-first approach has basically three big components. I'm going to quickly run through what does it mean to understand people as cultural beings? Why is that important in finance? What does it mean to understand people as social beings? Why is that important in finance? And then, of course, why do we need to understand that there's also functional value, this sort of more traditional UX that is essential if we want to create fintech solutions that add real value to real people and to the society. Very quickly, the cultural and social value, I mean, the very, very simple theoretical framework is that behind it is that, okay, traditionally, finance has been totally linked to financial institutions. Basically, the early projects of digitalization were just translating the old metaphors of bank and people and those types of relationships into some sort of digital format. But as technologies evolve, as we have faster networks, what will happen is that form of the institutions, such as a bank, will no longer define what finance is, but actually it'll be here in the air. And finance only lubricates human relationships. And what that means is that the true competition will be on who has the best market definition. What is your value proposition? It won't be a traditional value proposition of a bank. We need to have new design metaphors. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about functional value. I move forward as fast as I can. So just as Risto said, this is actually something that we've faced over and over again over the past few years when working with the major US financial institutions. Finance fundamentally is undergoing a massive change because we have a generation of Americans who no longer believe in banks. Actually, I think for about 50% of millennials don't even have credit cards anymore. And then you need to ask a question, what is finance? It is in itself a technology. It's a technology that connects us into the future, right? It doesn't do much more than that. It's actually connecting us to what is possible. And what we see here is that what's going on in finance is that our relationship, or the relationship of young people with the future, is changing. Young people no longer necessarily believe in a better future. Yet the whole industry was born with the idea that it's a technology that connects us to a better future. It's a rocky path there. So if you're, for example, a company that deals with investing or deals with pensions, what are you going to be using your technological capability for? If people no longer want to use your technology to connect them to their pension because they no longer think the future will be better, there will be other players emerging from tech who are going to be addressing this problem, especially when people no longer trust in banks. Okay, here's another thing. If you don't understand culture and society or people's social relationships, you're probably not going to be able to see the biggest changes or the biggest big opportunities that technologies such as alternative currencies are going to bring to us. Here's a little interesting example. This is something called Fureya Kippu. It's an alternative currency that was developed in Japan. It basically translates into caring relationship ticket. It's a time currency, basically. Before Japan had any very interesting social welfare models, I mean, it was a country that had to introduce local solutions to the problem of care. I mean, care essentially is immensely important. So when people get old, they don't only need medical care. What we need is actually help with daily little tasks. Who's going to shovel the snow? Who's going to do the groceries for you? That is care. Now, what is happening to care? If you want to understand the market of care, you need to start looking at who does care. In the case of Japan is interesting because the rest of the world is suffering from the same problem. People who used to care, meaning family members, are no longer there to care for us because of global migration. The distance between grandchildren and grandparents has massively grown. So how do we tackle a problem like this? They introduce a currency for care, meaning that if I live in New York City, if I help someone in Brooklyn, an old lady living next to me, maybe I get an hour of care currency that I can send to my mother in Savonlinna, Finland, and actually she will pass it forward to someone else who cares for her. And the only reason for using that currency is because we want to care. And that's going to be a massive market that is still untapped. But you don't see these markets unless you study people as social beings.
Thank you so much, Johannes.